Welcome to Real Life, Real Leaders. This is Bonnie Hageman, and today I have retired Army General David Komar as our guest, and we are really looking forward to hearing about his leadership experience and some of the great achievements and trials and struggles that he had along the way. So welcome to the program, David.
Well, thank you.
I'm so glad to have you here. You have such an amazing background and career, and I want to talk about all of that. But today, you are the CEO of Culture Guide. Talk to us about your current company.
Yeah, Culture Guide, what we do is we enable CEOs to build exceptional, enduring culture within their organization. I started this as part of a lifelong study. The last 35 plus years, I've been both a student and a practitioner of organizational culture. And over those years, I've matured and refined and evolved my thinking around that and how to do it. There's a lot of great literature out there about what great organizational culture is, what it looks like, how important it is, and to some degree, the leader's role in that. But when it comes to actually executing it and driving towards that future state, that culture that leader is aiming towards, then it becomes much more difficult. And part of I think the main reason is people don't have a foundational structure in order to drive that culture. So again, over about the last 20 or so years, I've developed a framework with 5 elements that helps leaders take where it is they want to go and translate that into actionable and observable behaviors in order to move the organization forward.
Oh, yes, that was going to be my question. Like, how do you do that? So, yes, and it looks like you certainly have a lot of experience. So tell us about, you did big things in the Army, and give us a little background on some of those high level things that you did that were, really you're proud of.
Probably one of the biggest things that we did starting in August of 2003, while the U.S. was involved in both Iraq and Afghanistan, the Chief of Staff of the Army directed that we reshape and reorganize the entire Army's operational force in order to meet the demands of those theaters. So literally in a matter of 3 months, we entirely redesigned the operational Army and converted the first unit to that new design within 6 months of beginning, which is normally something that takes several years to do, but we were able to do it on an accelerated timeline. And in the end, it wound up being the largest reorganization of the Army since World War I.
Wow, that's amazing. So how many people are in the Army?
Well, there's 1.1 million people in the Army. That's active duty. That's the Army Reserve, the Army National Guard, as well as the civilian workforce. It's about a $135 billion a year operation. And obviously, we're typically deployed in 100 to 120 countries at any given time. So the scope of problems we face are enormous and sometimes difficult to get your arms around.
Very difficult. That's extremely impressive. That's a huge redesign. I mean, we're working with a company right now, just they have about 5,000 employees, and just that redesign, is a bit of a challenge. So I can only imagine how complex that was.
It was, and it really wasn't just a matter of coming up with the new designs and having the senior Army leadership say, all right, we're going to move, we're going to convert to these designs. It was really a huge effort to inform everyone of what we were doing, Congress, the media, the other services, so that they could see that what we were doing was actually going to move the Army in the direction that it needed to go in order to meet the current demands. So, a lot of people think of the Army as this very autocratic organization, but in fact, once you get above the very low tactical levels in the Army, it's really very collegial. Mm-hmm. much of it is about building coalitions and influence and, being able to convince people and show people, demonstrate to them why they ought to support what you're doing. And that's particularly important when you go over to Capitol Hill and talk to members of Congress and professional staff members so that they understand what you're trying to do so they can support that.
That's very important. That was one of my questions is what were the results? Other than obviously you were the largest reorg, but what else? What came out of that redesign?
And what came out of that redesign was the ability of the Army to meet its rotational deployment requirements. So what we wound up doing was taking much larger formations and breaking those capabilities down into smaller organizations so they could then be more readily deployed. So that was a tremendous benefit. It allowed us to access a greater portion of the soldiers because they were now in these smaller organizations that were able to rotate more quickly to and from theater, and it's really enduring since to today as far as how we're organized. Now we've learned lessons along the way and made adaptations, just like any organization would. But what we did, really has proven to be very effective. And one of the strategies that we used in order to convince folks and let them know what we're doing and why we're doing it is we brought the people that we thought were going to be detractors in early. So General von Riper, retired 3-star Marine, typically very critical of the Army and what the Army's doing. Several other people that were in that same camp, and we brought them into the tent early, showed them what we were doing, and said, okay, what are your thoughts? What are your criticisms? And then addressed most of those criticisms. So once we were moving forward with it, then those critics had very little left to say.
Right.
So
that's a lesson in leadership right there. Is like, get your critics involved so that they can be a part of the solution.
Absolutely, because the criticism will come regardless, and if you can bring it out early and address it, then it's going to make the implementation much smoother.
Absolutely. A lot of times leaders they almost they want to sort of ignore the fact that they know it's coming, but it's like they push it over to the side and like, we'll deal with that later. And then, that it can kill your plans. And so I like what you did by bringing them in early. We do that sometimes with with executive development design. So we'll bring in, the senior leaders and especially the noisy ones to help with the design so that they're the champion when it's all said and done.
Yeah, no, I think that's absolutely critical. And it couple things. One, typically they have some very well-founded criticisms. No plan is perfect right out of the chute. So, you might as well go ahead and bring those out so that you can help formulate your plan and refine your plan. And it shows that, you are open and willing to listen to people across the organization that you may not agree with. So I think it's really a trait of a transparent leadership in a healthy company culture to be able to do that.
Well, I agree, and it also speaks to diversity and inclusion at some level because you're bringing in those, even though whether it's ethnic, or whatever. In this case, it might just be diverse viewpoints, mm-hmm. and including those from whatever part of the organization it comes from.
No, I think you're absolutely right, and I think you've got to be proactive in doing that because everyone's had different experiences. Everyone approaches problems in a different way, and if you want the best solutions, then you need to have the greatest variety or the greatest diversity of thought going into that. Obviously, DEI is very topical today, and typically people think of that as race and sex, ethnicity, et cetera. But I would offer that you need to go even deeper than that. One of the things that I've found is, to me, one of the biggest differences of the way people approach things is where they were raised. I'll tell you, people that grew up in a city, in an urban area, they will approach the same problem very differently from someone who grew up on a farm.
Absolutely. As someone who grew up on a farm, I agree with that completely.
No, absolutely. So, not all diversity you can see with your eye. You've got to be able to use your mind as well.
Yeah, I agree. Well, and just talking about back to your results, you also were able to increase the budget for the Army. We're in that process.
Yeah, and in particular, from one of my last assignments in the Army as the Army's Director of Capability Development, that was a huge challenge. When I took that job over, what we typically heard from Congress, whether it be members of Congress or professional staff members on the committees, hey, we don't know what, we don't think the Army knows what they want. They keep changing their story. They don't really show us why they need what they're asking for, et cetera, et cetera. So as we reviewed, and there were a myriad of things going on in that organization at the time, but one of the things that we had to focus on is how do we better communicate that. So what we did was we made sure that as we were identifying what the gaps were between what we believe the Army was going to need in the future to be able to do and what it can do, and identifying those gaps, we put that in context. So we identified the future threat, the future environment, and showed how the Army, what role the Army plays in helping to deter that, or if necessary, defeat those potential adversaries. And we laid it out in a very clear step-by-step manner that then allowed you to prioritize what your requirements were, so that as you're funding them, then the members of Congress could know that. And I tell you, it went over extremely well. We went from, hey, you guys in the Army and the gals in the Army, you don't really know what you want, to, hey, we now understand and we're willing to help you. So we were able to, the 2 years I was there, we were able to increase the Army's modernization budget by 25%, going from $20 billion a year to $25 billion a year. So that was a great that was a great win.
Yeah, that's a great win, and it's different. I misunderstood. I was thinking that the 25% increase was tied to the reorg, but you're talking about future capability. So right. I see. Yeah. That's very good. And then tell us about your experience with NATO.
That was a great opportunity. I was the director of training and force modernization, force development for the Afghan security forces for the NATO training mission, Afghanistan. I was there 2011 to 2012. Had about 4,800 people that worked in the organization all across the country. That's international soldiers and sailors and airmen and Marines from all the various NATO countries, as well as some from other than NATO countries like Mongolia. And we were responsible for setting up and resourcing all of the training and all the equipping for the Afghan National Security Forces, both the police and the Afghan National Army. That was a $10.8 billion per year operation. And it was not only very challenging, but there was a tremendous amount of oversight on that money, because the 3-star commanding general, I worked directly for him in this capacity, and Congress actually appropriates that money directly to him, to that position. So there was really only one person between me and Congress. And in fact, Congress had set up a special Inspector General for Afghan Reconstruction. We call it CGAR, is what it goes by, the acronym. And they were extremely interested in what we were doing with that money. So one of the things we do is set up a more disciplined process to look at what are those requirements, what are those needs from the Afghan security forces, and then making sure we had the audit trail as far as once we spent the money, where did it go? Was the equipment being accounted for, et cetera? So there was a great deal of interest in I met every week with one of the auditors from the CGAR, and they
wait, what's the CR? What's the CR?
It's the CR, the SIGAR, Special Inspector General for Afghan Reconstruction.
Okay.
Yeah, I'm sorry, but yeah. So it was a great opportunity to be able to work with people from all over the world, seeing how they thought, how they operated, how the culture, their country's culture impacted the way they thought about problems, the way they addressed situations. It was really fascinating, and I learned a tremendous amount. And one of the other great benefits was I was able to travel all around the country of Afghanistan.
Oh, that's fantastic. Wow, what a interesting career and life you've had so far.
Today's podcast is brought to you by EDA, a human capital firm that provides leadership development for your top of the house executives. One of our services is succession planning. The reason companies need succession planning is because the quality of a leadership team is a key differentiator for every organization. It's not about forcing anyone to leave their position or retire. Rather, it's proactively analyzing the talent and ensuring that your organization has highly qualified and well-developed leaders in all mission-critical positions, not just today, but tomorrow, next year, and even 5 years from now. If you're interested in succession planning for your organization, please reach out to learn more at www.executivedevelopment.com.
I'm pulling some themes in my head. So, I'm thinking about your leadership, and a few things that I see. One is obviously you have great critical thinking skills because you're able to get into some very complex situations and sort those out. And then I see, your communication, your clarity, like in that where around the where you increase the budget, just creating clarity, which is often missing in the communication. And then your transparency is something that seems to be coming through as themes. Would you agree that those are some of your skills?
No, I agree. And when it comes to transparency, I think that's one of the most critical things, because people understand when you make a mistake, perhaps you make a decision that's not optimal in the given situation. But as long as you can include people to the greatest degree possible in the formulation of those decisions and in the execution of those decisions, people I think are pretty understanding, and people in general, I think people want to help you.
Yes, they do want to help. Yes, and the other thing is, at least in the past, and probably a lot still today, information can be used as power, and we see leaders who like to withhold information as a way to use that power. And I just see that the environment has shifted to where that's really not acceptable. And the leaders who will be successful going forward, I think, are the transparent leaders.
No, I definitely concur with that. Yeah, I think the days are gone where, number one, where people, it's even possible for them to control the information. Literally about the only information that it's extraordinarily difficult for people to get access to is one-to-one verbal communication. So so I think one, it's very difficult, and two, in today's information age, people understand how you can leverage information, to do positive things. it seems like it makes very little sense to me to restrict the information that your people have, because the more information they have, the better they're going to be able to conduct their analysis, to recommend solutions to problems, potential courses of action that you could take in a given situation. So yeah, I think clearly it's folly to try to restrict the information. In fact, I think one of the biggest challenges of leadership is to really, facilitate that access to information.
Yes.
Where oftentimes, depending on your organization, I know my experience in the Army was oftentimes we relied much too strongly on email.
Mm-hmm.
And email is one of the worst ways to transmit information to people, because either they weren't on the email distribution and didn't get it, or sometimes worse, they get too many emails, and then it's difficult for them in an overflowing inbox to sort the wheat from the chaff and figure out, okay, what's really important here? What is it I need to know? So I think one of the, you talk about using information for power. I think instead of withholding it, I think if you want to increase power across the entire organization, that you want to, one of the leader's critical jobs is to increase and facilitate that flow of information.
Well, that's good, and I agree with you on email. And the other problem with email is the very likely ability to misinterpret. And because it's through writing versus that one-to-one. We like to get real here on Real Life, Real Leaders. So let's talk about challenges. Tell us about one of the more difficult experiences of your career, and then we'll talk about how you got through it.
Yeah, one of the most difficult experiences of my career, and I chose this because I think it's something that most people can identify with. It's, interestingly enough, it surrounds one of the accomplishments that I'm most proud of in reorganizing the Army. When the Chief of Staff of the Army decided that we needed to reorganize the operating force, there was a two-star general that was put in charge of that organization, and he was an incredibly toxic leader. Very volatile. It depended upon who he was talking to. A friend of mine was riding the airport, was briefing him, and it's just amazing. He could go from being incredibly charming one minute to being incredibly caustic and acerbic the next minute. And it was just a terrible, terrible environment to work in. Tremendous amount of pressure. We were already working, 80, 90 hours a week, and people are like, "Oh, you're exaggerating." I'm like, no, I'm really not. And if you're deployed in the theater for an operation, that's one thing. You kind of expect that, but a lot of the time spent was could have been better spent. I think if the leadership would have given us better direction and more clarity.
Yes.
I tell you, it got really, really bad. And one of the things that I really focused on was, no matter how much pressure I was under, and no matter how much I'll just say, pressure, how much, this was an individual who, he would just berate people.
Yes.
In fact, in front of others,
Yeah.
I'd see him berate people in front of their subordinates. But no matter how much of that went on, I always tried to make sure that I acted as a buffer between him and the people that worked on our team. And that was incredibly difficult, incredibly challenging.
Well, it's hard under normal circumstances, but I've worked for long periods for the 80, 90-hour weeks that you're talking about. And in those circumstances, it's like, especially after a while, your nerves just get on edge. Like you live sort of in this raw state.
Yeah.
And so how did you handle it? Because I know what you're talking. I mean, I think everybody listening is probably thinking, oh, I know that guy, not him specifically,
Right.
but someone like that who's volatile and, just causes all kinds of grief one way or another. So how did you handle it when you're in that state, being tired, constantly tired, and then having to put up with that? How do you stay calm as a leader, or did you?
No, I did the best. I certainly did the best I could. And really, one of the comments that people have made about me over the years, that I'm the one that I'm probably most proud of, was someone I really respect who worked on our team during that project. And she could see how much pressure I was under, how I had to deal with this leader every day. And she said, no matter how bad it got, he never took it out on us. And so I take great, I won't say pride, but I really appreciate being able to do that for them. But I tell you, it took all of my patience that often ran out. Sometimes I would just have to separate myself from the situation.
Yes.
I'd literally have to leave the building and go walk around for 20 or 30 minutes and outside and try to clear my head. But a lot of it was just being able to talk to some friends about the situation. Prayer.
Yes.
Trying, asking for help. But I tell you, the one thing I did was I never forgot the fact that what we were doing was absolutely critical to the Army's success in the very near future. And that our ability to do our job and create the best possible organizations, because those organizations, those were what people's sons and daughters, those are the organizations they were going to be in Iraq and Afghanistan. And if we didn't do the very best job we could, regardless of the circumstances, because nobody in Iraq or Afghanistan really cares that Dave Komar was stressed out, back in the States trying to, work for an incredibly toxic leader. So I really, kept that at the forefront, that, it was all going to be worth it. We had to do the best job we could, and I couldn't let, my frustrations and, I couldn't, become impatient and let the people, who worked on the team, who were doing the truly heavy lifting, I couldn't let it affect them.
That's what's going to be my next question, is how'd you get through it? And thank you for sharing that, because, we did some work with the Department of Defense in the past, and I always really valued just what you're saying, is that focus on the warfighter. And, but it goes both ways. And I hope people who are listening will hear that, there are, because sometimes you can be the one on the ground or the one on the front lines, and you're thinking that the leaders are not watching out for your best interest. But, I love this scenario because you can see both. Like, you're looking at them saying, we have to get through this, and I have to do this in spite of all these negative circumstances. But I hope that they can see too that, there are people that are really focused on the warfighter and just trying to make it better for them. And so, I think as an American, we all appreciate that, and appreciate that you stuck with it and reorganized. So tell me, what's next for you? So what are you going to do going forward? You've retired from the military, and you've been through some incredible things there, and you're going to build this or you are building the company that you have. And what else do you have going on?
Well, I'm currently writing a book. In fact, I'm stressing a little bit because I've got a deadline tomorrow afternoon when I talk to my book coach. So I'll be scrambling here the rest of the day and tomorrow to make sure that I don't look too bad during our meeting. But it's a book that I've had written in my head for probably about the last 5 years. And what I wanted to do is I wanted to take all of those very hard lessons learned, over the 25, 30, 35 year time period, and to bring them together and help people to build organizations that have a great company culture. My big vision, my big dream is that everyone in the world loves where they work. And I know the only way that's going to happen is if CEOs build exceptional, enduring culture in their organization. And so that's where I see my role, is to help them to do that. So I'm writing a book. We'll do speaking engagements after that, and build this coaching business. And I hope my goal is not that it just be sort of a one-off and hang a shingle and coach CEOs, but that I'd be able to expand that, bring new coaches on, train and educate those coaches so that they can go out and do one-on-one group coaching, speaking events, et cetera. Because again, my vision is that everyone loves where they work, and the metrics behind the importance of culture, I mean, they're incredibly clear. You can look at Gallup, for instance. They, according to their polls, just over a third of the U.S. employees are engaged at work. Now, imagine what we could do with productivity if, say, we just doubled that to 2 out of 3 employees were engaged. Think about what that would do, not only for the company, but if this happened on a large scale across the economy, think about how much stronger the economy would be, how we would be able to, literally, impact, practically everyone who lives in poverty today. If you look alongside also, not just the engagement, but the increases in productivity year to year in the United States, it's really minuscule.
Yes.
And I think that, there's only so much increase in productivity you're going to get out of refining your processes, tightening up your supply chain, et cetera. Certainly you can get a return on investment there. But to me, the true return on investment is by increasing the engagement of your employees. And the way to do that is to have a great culture that those people feel appreciated, that they feel valued, and they feel a part of the organization and what the organization achieves.
Oh, you're speaking my language now. We are so aligned on that because, our whole thing is creating compelling cultures that last as well. And we're doing that through technology and through our services. And there's a ton of research out there on employee connectedness. So if there's CEOs listening, if you want an ROI, there's a lot of research out there, and by creating a compelling culture, you're going to increase engagement, which increases productivity, just like you're saying. You're going to decrease turnover, and you're going to decrease like sick leave and things like that. And so there's a huge ROI, and our biggest asset is our talent. And, I find so many leaders still today think of human resources as a peripheral. Instead of, it is the main thing.
Yeah.
Because that's where the talent is.
As I interview CEOs for my book, to the individual, they all agree how important culture is. And you and I have spoken about this previously. And even some of them think that it's one of the most important things in the organization and one of the most important things that they do. And when I ask them to describe that culture, what is that future state, that vision that either you want to achieve or you want to sustain, if you think you're already at the 98% solution from your culture, most of them can describe that. An alarmingly few number of them have it written down, which causes problem communicating that across the organization, particularly over time. Then when I ask them, okay, so how do you do it? I get I don't get a lot of quality responses to that question. And what I've really gathered from that is, while CEOs will think that's it's important, a lot of them don't go about it in a deliberate manner. And I found this true, and it's not just in the private sector. I found this true when I was in the Army. The Army has something they call command climate, but it's exactly like it's exact same thing as what we think of as company culture. And they're same way. They don't really teach people, hey, here's a way to actually, achieve that future state. It's just, it's sort of, well, we're going to put great leaders in charge of organizations and then they'll have great command climate. Well, that's what I thought when I started in the Army almost 35 years ago. And it took me, about 10 or 15 years to realize there was a whole lot more to it, which is why I developed this framework.
Yeah.
But again, if a CEO really wants to improve their culture and create this, as you call it, a compelling culture, compelling leadership and enduring culture, you got to have a plan. Think about it. Whether it's to increase your revenue or market share, et cetera, what business develops a plan, that sets a goal or an objective without a strategy to get there, without a plan to implement that strategy, and without a way to monitor progress? Nobody would do that. But at the same time, a CEO that says culture is the most important thing, doesn't do that. So again, that's why I developed the framework. Has 5 elements: the leader, purpose, people, process, and communication. And all it does, it provides that, again, a framework that they can lay out, identify the culture they want to build towards, and then see how each of those elements contribute to it and be able to move the organization forward.
Well, and they have to spend time on it. And that's the one thing I just want to add to what you're saying, because what I see is, one, it has to go on the goal list. It can't just be a peripheral. And second, then you have to actually spend time on it. So set meetings. I know, there are at least one organization where the CEO had just a culture meeting every month. That's all it was. No anything else but culture. And so, it's just important to spend time on it. I can't wait for your book to come out. When is it? What's the title? When's it coming out?
Well, the working title right now is Culture Guide: How Smart CEOs Build Excellent Company Culture. And the goal is to publish it by the end of September.
Oh, fantastic. So if you will send us a link, we will be sure to post that. And is Amazon, is that one of the best places to get it?
That's where yes, that'll be the primary access.
That'll be great. We'll make sure that our listeners get access to your book. Can't wait for that. Thank you again for coming here and joining us and sharing a little bit of your story. I know the listeners will gain a lot of value from the things that you've done. And we just appreciate you and all the work that you've done for our country, and appreciate you being on the program.
Well, thanks so much for having me.
All right. This is Real Life, Real Leaders. Thank you for tuning in, and we'll see you next week.
A special thank you to our listeners for taking time to tune in to this week's Real Life, Real Leaders podcast. We hope today's story inspired you. Check out previous episodes on the podcast to hear from more industry leaders, and check back next week as we speak to another leader and hear his or her great stories of triumphs and messy struggles. If you enjoyed the podcast, please rate, subscribe, and share. I'm Bonnie Hageman, and I look forward to sharing more with you next week.